We haven't yet done enough to make our communities and our country safer. We have to do more to keep dangerous people from getting their hands on a gun so easily. We have to do more to heal troubled minds. We have to do everything we can to protect our children from harm.
That was President Obama during his weekly address Saturday, during which he mentioned the anniversary of the Sandy Hook massacre that claimed the lives of 20 children and 6 educators. In Sunday's New York Times Magazine, Robert Draper wrote an article entitled "Inside the Power of the NRA," saying extreme gun groups can influence the NRA simply by casting it as the establishment organization, much as Tea Party candidates have pushed mainstream Republican incumbents farther to the right. That would seem to be what occurred in the case of the Manchin-Toomey bill. On Friday, Colorado was once again the scene of another school shooting in which a student gunman critically wounded a 17-year-old girl before killing himself. Some of our worst mass murderers have occurred in Colorado. At Columbine High School, where 12 students and 1 educator were killed, 27 were injured. And at a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado, where 12 people were killed and 70 others were injured. This year, Colorado was one of the states that enacted new gun control laws, but now many of Colorado's elected sheriffs are refusing to enforce those new laws. Joining me now, the author of the New York Times piece on the NRA, Robert Draper, and former Colorado State Senate President John Morse, who was recalled for his support for stricter gun laws in that state. Robert Draper, one of the things that I think is easy to forget and relatively new development on this front is that there are other gun rights groups out there that are far more radical than the NRA, or I should say more radical. I think you could calibrate what the differences are between them. But tell us about some of those groups and how they influence and pressure the NRA.
Sure, Lawrence. I mean, the NRA, being a much larger organization, about 4 to 5 million members, as best as we can tell, seeks to be the adults in the room. I mean, they're the ones who actually try to get things done. They actually, despite their reputation as the bullies on the block, are often involved in, how legislation is crafted. They certainly were with the Manchin-Toomey. These smaller gun groups, such as the Gun Owners of America and the National Association of Gun Rights, have maybe 1/10 the membership, maybe less than that, have only 1 lobbyist on their payroll, but they're the loud guys. They're the ones who through blast emails and other means of agitating their members, can force the NRA to quit compromising, and that's the word that they use over and over again. Here's the NRA going in the back room with Joe Manchin, trying to take away your gun rights, and it spooks the NRA, and that's what happened in the case of Manchin-Toomey.
And John Morse, you cast a vote in favor and supported in every way you could the new legislation in Colorado, and that cost you your seat. I want you to listen to what Sheriff John Cook had to say. He's one of the sheriffs who you're counting on in Colorado to enforce these new laws. Let's listen to what he had to say.
This one was purchased before July 1st when the law went into effect, so it was perfectly legal. This magazine might have been purchased in another state, in the free state of Wyoming, and smuggled across the border after July 1st, maybe. And Senator Morris, are you here? I'd like to ask you a question. Senator Morris? I guess I don't see him. But law enforcement has to enforce these laws, and I'm going to do a little shell and the pea game here. You know, when you put a little pea on your shell and you mix them up. All right, keep your eye on the pea. All right, let me make it a little tougher. Okay, which one's the illegal one?
John Morris, there's a sheriff playing games with the law that you passed. What's your reaction to that?
Well, the sheriffs clearly are elected officials. They're politicians, and he's playing to his base. I get that. I think limiting the number of rounds that someone has access to, we know that saves lives. We know that in Tucson, a 63-year-old woman was able to keep the shooter from reloading a final time, or maybe not even a final time, but to bring an end to that shooting. We know that when you've got a 100-round magazine like you did in Aurora, you can shoot 100 rounds before anybody gets a chance to do anything. When people reload, and we've seen in the Newtown report as well, it really appears that when that shooter had to reload, even with 30-round magazines, that's when children were able to escape. That's when there was a chance to actually take him down. So, I mean, obviously I'm mortified that folks that are elected directly to concern themselves with public safety, like sheriffs, are making a mockery of children dying at the hands of gunmen. But I understand that politics, that's sort of sometimes how it's played. It's hugely disappointing to me, but it is how it's played sometimes.
Robert Draper, in your piece, you talk about the possible declining influence of the NRA. You say time does not seem to be on the NRA's side, according to data compiled by the nonpartisan National Opinion Research Center. Between 1977 and 2012, the percentage of American households possessing one or more guns declined by 36%. That decline should not be surprising. To what do we attribute that decline?
Well, a couple of things. One is that fewer people hunt. The other is that there's less violence. I mean, America was very, very violent, and a violent country in 1968, and gun ownership was on the rise. But over the last 36 years, it has declined 36% because the main two reasons why a person would want to own a firearm are becoming less and less of a big deal. By the way, I'd like to refine a point of Senator Morse's regarding what the sheriff had said. In reading Erica Good's story in the New York Times about this, I actually thought that the sheriff was sincerely saying there are ambiguities in the law and that ought to be addressed. But then when you hear the tonality of what he says, it's clear that he's mocking it, and it's clear that that there's a smirky tone to it, and it's sort of unbecoming, I think, of a law enforcement officer to basically be saying, I'm not going to enforce these laws because I don't like them.
And John Morris, the enforceability of the laws is key, but the idea of a law enforcement official coming out there and literally making fun of the law and encouraging people to disrespect it, that I think is something that we don't have a lot of video on in this country.
Absolutely. But in this particular case, I mean, we have term limits in Colorado. So as a sheriff, you get 2 4-year terms in most jurisdictions. There are some that have changed it to 3, but that means, you've only got 8 to 12 years to serve. And then if you want to go on in an elected capacity, generally these are Republican kinds of folks, and Sheriff Cook is very Republican and very anti-gun safety. I mean, he actually would like to repeal the law that the people passed in 2000 after Columbine, saying that we've got to have background checks at gun shows. I mean, that law passed with over 70% approval, and he wants to repeal it. But at the same time, I mean, he's got to appeal to his base if he wants a new job. He's term limited, and he needs a new job. So he's running for the state Senate, so he's on the stump.
Robert Draper and John Morris, thank you both for joining me tonight.